Peace to the 5% nation of guys and earths. Assalamu alaikum, alhamdulillah, rahman to a lot of the true Muslim brothers and sisters out there. This is the King of New Jersey. This is Btbtv. We bully the bullies. And y'all already know what it is, yo. Dr. Umar Johnson had did an interview talking about Kevin Samuels. I took some of the interview and I'm gonna put it on after I speak. But I want y'all to know, sir, even though Dr. Umar Johnson agrees that black women shouldn't be celebrated Kevin Samuels dead, you also see a lot of hypocrisy in Dr. Umar Johnson in his interview. You could tell that Dr. Umar Johnson was jealous of the Godfather Kevin Samuels. He's also trying to promote himself as a high-value man. Promote himself as what the black community needed in order to get right. He tried to put himself in the position that Kevin Samuels in, but doing it in a different way. And one hypocrisy that he mentioned was the woman of being of Hawaiian or Pacific Islander descent, so she's not black. He sounded like a bubbling buffoon idiot. Anything that's not white is of the original context. Anything that you understand, Pacific Islander women, Hawaiian women, they are a mixture between black and Chinese and black and Asian, and however you want to say it. So by him saying that the woman that was found with Kevin Samuels wasn't black was a complete lie. Because we know she's original. We know she's not a devil, Caucasian. We also know the woman wasn't a big bone woman. She was a slim woman, a very attractive slim woman with a little bit of curves and everything. She was also an educated nurse. And by him also putting out the fact that her and Kevin Samuels had a disagreement earlier that day that was caught on video. So what? They had a disagreement. It wasn't a serious disagreement. He might have been dismissive of her, but I don't like to put murder on anybody. I don't like anybody jumping to the conclusion that Kevin Samuels got killed. He was set up. Kevin Samuels was a healthy brother, but Kevin Samuels also had a heavy Red Bull habit. So I can't say that it was the woman's fault that he died. I don't know if Kevin Samuels used what's that shit called? Viagra or any of that. And by Dr. Umar Johnson assuming that, saying things like that, and about some other things he said, Dr. Umar was like, let me get it right for y'all. Dr. Umar Johnson was pretty much saying that the black manosphere and pro-black men that chastise their woman verbally to be with how they would like them to be, that we're wrong, that we're degrading our women. I don't see how Kevin Samuels could degrade a woman that came called to ask for the information that he was given. However, although sometimes he's a little abrasive, like I said before, that's how my grandfather and my uncles are. And they Southern black men, strong black men. They bishops, ministers, deacons, masons. They're artists down south, you know what I'm saying? Where my mom's side from. And they had the same viewpoints as Kevin Samuels. But let me let Brother Umar know. One thing you're wrong about, you gotta take what Kevin Samuels said and do the knowledge to it. He said a high value man or high value woman. Pretty much he was saying stay in your class, your league. If you want a man to make $100,000+ a year, you gotta bring something like that to the table and not have a bunch of baggage and a bunch of kids. If he's a single man that makes over $100,000 a year, why would he date a woman with a bunch of kids and may have baby father issue? So he's saying that if you got kids and are almost to the poverty level, search for somebody equal to you or maybe a little above you, but don't search for nobody that's on a whole nother level, because that's usually not gonna happen for you. He telling them to be dealing reality, and I 100% agree with him. But yo, like I said, Dr. Umar Johnson, I see what you said. I agree with some of the things you said. But I want everybody to look at Dr. Umar and tell me what y'all think of what he said in this video. Yo, it's the King of New Jersey. This is Btbtv. We bully the bullies. And y'all already know what it is. We ain't the blood or Crip. We doing our own thing. Btbtv that started his own gang. Like, nigga, what?
Here, primarily for telling the truth. So why do you think we've seen such polarization over his death and many black women celebrating as if, they had just vanquished Thanos at the end of the Avengers or something when it comes to the passing of Kevin Samuels?
Here's what I would say. First thing that I think has to be said on this topic of the passing of Mr. Kevin Samuels is none of the black women who chose to go on his platform were forced to do so. He didn't beg any of them. He didn't manipulate any black women into coming on his platform. They all did so consciously of their own free decision. They came willingly. His platform was supported by women, and he has just as many female defenders as he has male defenders. And so therefore, to some degree, although I likewise did not agree with his message or his methods, many sisters who are suggesting that Kevin Samuels created this rift between black men and black women, they're being disingenuous. 75% of the vitriol, the hostility, and the vilification that black women are now showing towards Kevin Samuels would be more rightly placed or directed towards the queendom, the sisterhood, not Kevin Samuels. If anything, he exposed it, he exploited it, and he marketed the pre-existing differences between black men and black women, but he did not birth them. And so I'm disappointed in both the way that black men and black women are reacting to Kevin Samuels' death. On the side of the sisterhood, I'm seeing black women say things like, I'm throwing a party to celebrate his death. I've seen a sister say that. I've seen other women say, yes, we should be praising God for this. We should be honoring the ancestors that he is dead. But did you have the same energy for the police that killed Trayvon Martin? Did you have the same energy for the police who killed Breonna Taylor and Sandra Bland? I mean, what about the enemies of the black community? Did you throw a party when they were convicted or murdered or whatever the case may be? You don't show that type of vitriol to the enemies of black people, but yet you'll show it to Kevin Samuels. And then on the side of the brother's attorney, I take issue with the way in which many of our men are elevating him to the level of a black liberation martyr. Kevin Samuels was not a black activist. He did not have a history of grassroots work. I'm not aware of anything he did to fight against police injustice, mass incarceration, miseducation, gentrification, access to wealth. He was a businessman. He was a very successful businessman who used his platform to market his views on black male-female relationships to a tune of $3+ million. And I have no problem with people celebrating him as a businessman. I have no problem with people applauding the professional manner in which he offered his narrative to black men and black women. Three-piece suit, very calm, very professional, the ambiance of his platform. I had no problem with the way he conducted himself. But the method and the message I totally disagree with. And I support black men who want to support Kevin Samuels, but it is disingenuous and it is wrong, Dr. King and Medgar Evers and Malcolm X and Fred Hampton and the most honorable Marcus Garvey, to elevate this man's work to the level of martyrhood or saintdom when he has no history of grassroots activism or work. He was a businessman who did a very good job offering his opinions on male-female relationships.
Now, one of the questions I think people have is his death and the story around it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Do you think there's any validity to this question of whether or not he was assassinated? Because he was found with a Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Spanish woman who was a nurse, and it all just seems a little too convenient. Do you think there's any validity to this claim that he may have been assassinated?
I think there is validity. I do not believe that it is potentially a political assassination. He was very successful. He made a lot of money. He had enemies. And so I very much think that it is possible that black women who hated him or black men who were jealous of him could have potentially participated in a conspiracy that brought about his premature demise. I am also not going to rule out the possibility that the non-black woman that he unfortunately spent his last night on earth with may have been a proxy for his assassination. The fact that this footage showing that she and Mr. Samuels had a disagreement on camera, okay, he was a little perturbed. I saw the video. We could not see her, but it did look like she wanted to walk in front of the frame on his live, and he told her no. He motioned her away from that. It also looked like he was telling her, if you want to leave, go ahead and leave. You know, he seemed like he was dismissive of whatever her issue was. Understandably, if he's about to go live and she knows that, this is not the time to discuss your issue. So perhaps she wanted to sabotage his live to force him to deal with whatever her issue was. And allegedly, he succumbed on the very evening that he had this mild altercation with this woman. So yes, I think it is very possible that that woman, who many allege was a nurse, could have been a proxy in Mr. Samuels'. The fact that the police report mentioned that they were called for an injury. They didn't say a black male was having a heart attack. They were called there for an injury, which to me is suggestive of the possibility that there was some sort of a physical altercation that took place between him and that female. So yes, I do believe it could have been foul play.
We've gotten to a point in our society where it's very difficult to believe literally any narrative coming out of the mainstream media. And when it comes to this narrative about his activities on the last night of his life, very little of it is adding up. And I think that we have to take that in consideration, both in considering his physical, perhaps, assassination, but in the character assassination that we've seen happen thereafter. When you start seeing black women literally throwing parades and celebrating on the grave of Kevin Samuels because he has done the horrible and unforgivable action of telling the truth, it comes down to the white power structure being able to influence what you believe to be black femininity and black feminism, as opposed to what is actually important to supporting the black community?
There were truths in his message, but he chose to offer those truths in one of the most abrasive ways that you possibly could. He did not couch his assessments of black women in a loving or supportive manner. He gave them brutally. But I think that the brutal manner in which he offered his narrative is what gave birth to his rise on the social media platform. Had he not been brutal, he may not have been that successful. See, the contradiction of those who take issue with the disrespectful manner in which Kevin Samuels criticized black women, the hypocrisy lies in the fact that they listen to gangster rap music that disrespected them far more and far worse than Kevin Samuels did, but they're not wishing for the death of any of those artists. You see, they watch reality shows and they follow entertainers who have had some of the most disrespectful things to say about black women, but yet and still none of those entertainers or athletes were criticized or condemned as much as Kevin Samuels. And those people have made more money than Kevin Samuels, and they still happen to be walking on the earth. So we have to call a spade a spade. You know, I think, though, that in my personal opinion, Kevin Samuels' critique of black women and his prioritization of finances and physical attractiveness as being the two most important things in making someone a high value man, a high value woman, a high value mate, I don't agree with that at all. Because black men in this racist American society are often victimized by not being given adequate economic opportunity. So to put so much emphasis on money as being the determinant as to whether you can find you a quality woman, I reject that. And on the flip side, black women who have been so victimized by European standards of beauty forced upon them, I thought that Kevin Samuels' a reinforcement of those European standards of beauty on black women as what they need to measure themselves up against. I thought that was unfair. And to your point, the fact that he was found with a woman, a non-black woman, and because Kevin Samuels was a businessman and not an activist, I don't know if I could consider that an act of hypocrisy, because he played to the message black men wanted to hear, and he played to a market that made him a millionaire, at least in terms of views. So when you mentioned earlier that he was found to be broke after his death, I don't know how that's possible, because his videos were getting hundreds of thousands of views. He had a couple of videos that even had millions of views. And he was putting out videos constantly. So I am at a loss to understand how a man who clearly was making $1 million out broke. I think that in and of itself is a mystery also.
And so on that same point, I do have this question of how do we start having conversations in the black community? Because for every detraction you have of Kevin Samuels, you ain't going to call him a liar. So how do we start having these conversations in a non-toxic, non-defensive manner that can actually be productive towards revitalizing the black family?
I think, and that's a great question, 3 points to that question of how do we begin to have that conversation. Number one, attorney, we cannot have that conversation if the conversation is going to be filled with toxic black people who are operating from their pain and not from a place of love, who are operating from their history and not from a vision of healing for the black community. Too many of the people having these conversations have already made up their mind They don't believe black love is possible. And so we need to make sure that we know who is going to be participating in these conversations. It's okay to have some toxic black people in these conversations. But as you mentioned earlier, we need to have people in this conversation who have been in marriages for 10, 20, 30 years. We need to have people in this conversation, such as myself, who is a therapist and have been healing black families for years. Number two, attorney, I think there needs to be an intragender community conversation before there can be an intergender community conversation. In other words, black women need to have a conversation about black women. A lot of this negativity being directed towards a deceased and defenseless Kevin Samuels is unacceptable. Black women need to have a conversation with black women, and I think black men need to have a conversation with black men.